All right, sir. Tape is rolling. It's been a while since we got to kind of do our standard run through of the overall security situation. If you can kind of give us a lap around the country and what you folks have seen over the last few weeks.
Sure. The overall security trends continue to be positive, with levels of violence down lower than they were even in 2010. And of course, 2010, we had about 10% of the number of daily attacks that we had in 2007. So the trends continue to be positive and head in the right direction. The Iraqi security forces have had the lead for security throughout the country and are doing a credible job. At the same time, we do have occasional high-profile attacks, and in particular over the last 2 months, we've seen a number of these during a series of different religious pilgrimages. And the results of those, of course, are always horrific. So even though the trends are always very positive, and all have been very positive, we still do occasionally have some significant violence.
We've talked, obviously, General, about the progress that the Iraqi forces have made. Can you give us perhaps some specifics over the last few weeks or months of maybe some particular things that you've seen where they're performing maybe a bit better than they were before?
I sure can. One thing that I've seen over the years is that the Iraqi security forces have become more and more what I would call learning organizations. And in the U.S. military, we, of course, pride ourselves in being learning organizations. After every single operation or training event, we take a very hard look at ourselves and try to discover everything that we did well, but maybe even more importantly, those things we did not do well so that we can learn from them. The Iraqi security forces have been doing that regularly, and rather than just learning what they need to do better, actually they've been applying those lessons learned. So, for example, after we had a number of attacks in early November in Baghdad, they took a very hard look at themselves and made some meaningful progress on within Baghdad on how they conduct operations at checkpoints and how they synchronize the intelligence information and feed that to commanders, and then also how they use command and control platforms in a deployable sense. So every one of those changes were made based on lessons that they gleaned from current operations.
The attack that we saw in Ramadi, I guess it was about a week and a half ago, 10, 11 days ago, in an area where you have seen a lot of attacks from insurgents against the government specifically. Can you talk a little bit about Western Iraq and maybe just a couple of the other, maybe not necessarily hotspots, but places where you maybe have seen some increased insurgent activity?
Well, I'd like to challenge your use of the word insurgent. In this particular case, I think that what we've seen, these attacks are most likely attributed to Al-Qaeda. And Al-Qaeda, unlike where Al-Qaeda was, say, operating in Anbar province, including Ramadi in 2005, 6, or 7, they're very much an isolated terrorist organization. They are still dangerous. They are still committed to murder as many people as they can and drive a wedge between the security forces and the government. But this is not exactly the same thing as an insurgency. And unlike the past, they don't have the support of the local populace. So their networks have been degraded through the combined efforts of the U.S. and Iraqi security forces, and we've degraded various parts of their networks. But they do still remain dangerous, and occasionally they rear an ugly head, as they did in Ramadi a couple of weeks ago.
Can you tell us anything about levels of weapons caches that you folks have perhaps come across in the recent past?
I sure can. Last week, the Iraqi security forces, last week alone, the Iraqi security forces found and cleared 32 improvised explosive devices. Those were set to go off, in addition to 33 caches that they found. And this is a fairly steady level of progress that we see throughout the country. So, and you notice I said it was the Iraqi security forces, not U.S. forces, but the ISF that's out in the lead conducting all these patrols and running down the intelligence to find the caches. Just last night, we had reports, operational reporting of the Iraqi security forces in Saladin province, an area called the Hamrin Mountains. They found 2 caches that included a total of 124 fully assembled IEDs in one cache and 80 in another. So that's 204 lethal weapons, improvised explosive devices that they were able to keep from being used against anybody, civilians, Iraqi security forces, or us.
We've talked in the past about the importance of having the population provide tips on where some of these caches may be. Have you found perhaps that folks are more willing to give that kind of information to the Iraqi forces to track down as opposed to providing them to Americans?
I think that we've seen it ebb and flow over time, and I think that the Iraqi people, once they realize that somebody is on their side, if you will, to protect them, whether it was the U.S. forces, particularly in the aftermath or during the surge of 2007 and 8, when we moved back into the neighborhoods and our purpose changed to protect the Iraqi civilians, we got a lot of tips, and obviously the Iraqi security forces are filling that role now. So the more that they fill the role, the more that the people get to know them, and there's a trust established, you see a greater number of tips coming in.